Peniel Joseph is going to be joining us to do a call-in on civil rights, but we're pleased to have another author, longtime congressman, joining us, James Clyburn. He's also participating in the conversation. Here is his book, Blessed Experiences, Genuinely Southern, Proudly Black. Congressman Clyburn, we wanted to kind of peg off what Peniel Joseph was talking about with Stokely Carmichael and do a call-in segment with our viewers on civil rights.
Sure.
And I want to start by asking you, how many times were you arrested during the civil rights heyday movement?
Well, I don't remember. I never really kept count on the number of times that we were arrested. I write in the book about two of them, the first one and the last one. I remember very well the first one because that's the day I met my wife. We met in jail. And that became a real blessing for me. The last time was in Columbia, South Carolina in 1961. And I remember that one so well because that arrest led to a landmark breach of the peace case called Edwards against South Carolina. It became the a law school case that most universities that used the casebook method used that case to teach from. And I happened to be one of those arrested that day. So I remember those two. In between, a lot of times we got arrested and were never really charged. We was just taken to the police station, taken off the streets of Orangeburg, and then put back on once the crowd dispersed. So I never really kept count on all of that.
Why were you and Emily Clyburn arrested, and what year was that?
Well, it was March 15th, 1960. It was 6 weeks after those students were arrested up in Greensboro, North Carolina, and several weeks before we first met at Shaw University up in Raleigh, North Carolina, to form SNCC that was just being talked about. I had been locked up around 10 o'clock in the morning. Emily, my wife, was among those students that they didn't have room for in the jails, and so they herded them back to the campuses, South Carolina State and Claflin universities. Well, they came back down to the jail later that evening, around 6:30, to bring us food. And she walked in the door and walked toward me with this hamburger in her hands, and I reached for it. She pulled it back, broke it in half, gave me half of it. She ate the other half. I was so grateful for that half hamburger. I married her 18 months later. Now I found out after we were married for 10 years, at our 10th anniversary, she fessed up to tell me that that was not a chance meeting, that she and her roommate one day was standing in the dormitory room watching me walk across the campus with the young lady I was dating at the time. She told her roommate that we did not make a good couple, that she was going to be my wife. And she set out with her plan that culminated on June 24th, 1961. So this past June, we celebrated our 53rd wedding anniversary.
Well, James Clyburn has represented the 6th District of South Carolina since 1993. It encompasses a little bit of Charleston, a little bit of Columbia, and a lot of territory in between. He'll be joining us to talk about civil rights. We're going to put the numbers up on the screen if you'd like to participate in this conversation with James Clyburn and Peniel Joseph. 202 is the area code, 585-3890 for those of you in the East and Central time zones, 585-3891 if you live out west. And if you can't get through on the phone lines, try Twitter. @BookTV is our Twitter address, and facebook.com/BookTV. If you'd like to make a comment on Facebook, we'll try to get those into those comments as well. Congressman Clyburn, age 12, What made you become an activist, and how did you become an activist at that age?
Well, when I was growing up, my dad and moms were both very active. And around 1951, 52 is when things began to percolate, most especially over in Clarendon County. My father, yes, in South Carolina. My father was a minister, and the man who was organizing all of the people over in Clarendon County was a minister, Reverend J. Eddie Lane. And so my dad used to, at breakfast every morning, he would be praying for the people of Clarendon County and Reverend J. Eddie Lane. And so we started forming youth councils of the NAACP throughout the South. And I went to the meeting at the Emmanuel United Methodist Church back in just about 2 months before my 13th birthday. And some kind of way, I guess I went to the restroom or something, but it turned out when the meeting was over, I was the president of the Sumter Youth Council. And that just grew to the sit-ins in 1960, the forming of SNCC in April at Shaw University that year. And then I met Martin Luther King Jr. for the first time that October down at Morehouse College in Atlanta. Also the same time I met John Lewis. And so I guess it came from my parents, my associates in college, and went on through to the day. And here we are, John Lewis and I, having spent almost 22 years in Congress together. Now, he got elected before I did, so he's got almost a quarter of a century.
And you're the assistant majority leader, or Democratic leader in the House.
Democratic leader, yes.
In the House of Representatives.
Right.
What do you remember about growing up in the Jim Crow era?
Oh, in my book, the most memorable situation occurred in 1955. In 1955, my high school band was invited to play march in the Christmas parade. It was the first time they were entertaining any black units. It was customary in those days for Santa Claus to be the last unit riding on a fire truck. And after Santa Claus, the horses from a local equestrian stable would march. Now, they were the last thing because of those droppings they left along the way and the aroma that flowed from those droppings. When we got down there to march in the parade that day, it turned out that we were placed in the parade behind the horses. It was very, very difficult and very, very memorable to try to play that clarinet while sidestepping those droppings and trying to breathe in and out the way you have to with the aroma of those stale oats. That to me was probably the most lasting memory from that year because of that. I left that high school and went to Mather Academy where my mother had gone to school, and that's where I graduated from. And I really believe that it was the experience at that United Methodist School in Camden, South Carolina, where I first interacted with white teachers and white people that really changed me dramatically. In fact, it was more transformational. It was the most transformational thing until I met Martin Luther King Jr. That weekend in October 1960. And sitting up with him to 4:30 in the morning was also transformational to me. Those two experiences, I think, shaped me more than anything else.
Peniel Joseph, Professor Joseph, you've been watching Book TV. You just saw him talking about his most recent book, Stokely, A Life. Here's the cover. Professor Joseph, what's your impression of these lions of the civil rights movement, I guess, this first generation?
Oh, very, very important. I mean, Congressman Clyburn and Congressman Lewis are part of the heroic period of the civil rights movement. They were activists on the ground as students. They're shaped by Jim Crow segregation. They actually got to meet people